Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2 of AI Cubed. My name's Alan, an AI investor in MBA from Berkeley, and I have my host here, Albert.
Hi, my name is Albert. I am a product manager at AWS.
Awesome. Well, in today's episode, we're going to talk about three things. The first is the commentary on AI slowdowns. We have different sides of the parties talking about whether there is a wall or not. The second one is Perplexity's recent valuation and investment at $9 billion dollars and some of the products that it's developing and how it can differentiate itself from some of the other LLMs in the market. And finally, our favorite tools of 2024 that are AI oriented. With that said, let's hop in. Um, Albert, do you want to start with talking about what this AI slowdown actually means and why some people say there is a slowdown?
Yeah. So the big news since last week is there's been a number of different AI researchers and even leaders of these big AI companies. I think like a Sundar Pichai, for instance, made comments basically stating that the advancement of AI models based on pumping more data into them has basically slowed. So a year ago or a couple of years ago when ChatGPT came out, there was this assumption called the scaling law, which basically means that basically the more data that you pump into the AI model, the smarter it gets. And so when we look at GPT 3.5 versus GPT 4, one of the big things that people always look at is how much data was it trained on, right? And it's a it's a vast difference between GPT 3.5 and GPT 4. And we also saw a proportional increase in performance as a result of that. And so the growing idea was, okay, well, let's just pump more data in, make these models even bigger, right? Make the large language models as large as possible, and pretty soon we'll reach AGI. And I think that that was an underlying assumption, which has driven a lot of the AI spend. But we're basically these comments state that we're kind of coming to the end of that. We're plateauing in terms of how much marginal improvement we're able to squeeze out of these models by pumping more data in. We're also reaching the point where we're running out of data to pump into models as well. So they basically consumed a significant amount of what pretty much already exists on the internet. So we're basically at a point. I think Sundar, CEO of Google, he's come out and said we are at a point where we're probably going to see more incremental improvements as opposed to exponential improvements in AI until we reach the next major breakthrough. And so right now, what researchers are doing is they're working on ways to find, are there ways that we can improve the models without pumping more data? So like one example is what OpenAI has done with the O1 model is instead of just spitting out results as soon as you give it a prompt. Take some time, think about it, come up with a couple options, evaluate those options, and reason before giving a result. And so that's how they came up with their O1 model. And I think Google's done the same with their Flash as well. And so that's basically kind of the big news that's come out. It's also a trend that's been developing over the last couple months. And so what I think is really interesting, and Alan certainly would love to hear your thoughts here, is what does this mean for the AI race next, right? Now it's no longer a race of who can get the most data, who can build the most data centers. It's now who can most intelligently either work on the foundational models, or maybe it's who is going to be most effective at applying the AI. So curious about your thoughts here.
Yeah, so I think it potentially is true in the fact that the low-hanging fruit has been picked around the model improvements. But having said that, there is to say that you wouldn't slow down investment, despite it being incrementally more difficult. In terms of what the data is telling us, at least, there is no slowdown in investment. Despite the Microsoft CEO mentioning, the easy increments of training has been picked off, Microsoft still, at least in the last year, has outspent its rivals when it compares to the top of GPUs. And then if we jump out here and look at the CapEx spend for AI data centers, it's obviously led by the Mag 7 here. And a lot of the forecasts from the 10K and investor presentations from the hyperscaler Mag 7 companies still indicate ongoing AI spend here. So despite the slowdown, I still think there will still be significant amount of spend. And, we've all seen in the news that these companies have still continued to invest in NVIDIA chips, but also develop their own chips as well. And then on the other side of the token, according to Jensen Huang, the godfather of AI at the moment, you know, there is no wall, and same thing with Sam Altman here. So it's still difficult to say whether there is a wall or not, and we still haven't hit the 12th day of OpenAI's Christmas launches. So on the 12th day, a lot of pundits are talking about GPT-5 coming out. So we may just find out in a few days' time, if there is a new model or not. But I think you're absolutely right, Albert, that the next focused area is around inferencing and the use cases that sit around it. We are still in such early days for that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think AI spend is probably going to continue for a good amount. I mean, Micron's earnings a couple days ago, they're seeing massive, massive growth in AI data center spend. AI data center now makes up 50% of their total revenue, which is quite remarkable for a company that, sells commoditized memory chips. And we just had a new $1 trillion company. Do you know which one it is, Alan? Did you see the news about the new $1 trillion company?
Not Tesla, is it? Or is it?
It's not. No, Tesla's gotten there a long time ago. It's Broadcom. Broadcom is the being looked at as potentially another AI darling because they make they're one of the big makers of custom AI chips along with Marvell. And so it's thought that they're moving down that path as well. But that said, I think AI spending can't continue forever as well. I think, Zuckerberg said, I think the hyperscalers have probably overinvested at this point. And Satya's comments from Microsoft, which is NVIDIA's biggest customer right now, based on the chart you showed, he said, we are no longer facing demand shortages for GPUs. Like all the GPUs they want, they are now able to get. Versus a year ago, right? Like there were executives going to Jensen and begging him to allocate some GPUs to him. Now we're at a point where supply has caught up to demand. I think we have, definitely increased supply, but it also means that demand is probably gonna it's gonna grow, but it's not gonna continue to grow like as high as it has before. And I think those are the same comments that Sundar has made as well. And so, with that said, I think we can both agree the AI spending is going to continue. It's going to continue to grow. But in terms of models, I guess that's what's going to be really interesting. Is the future going to be, we maybe we will see GPT-5 in a couple days. But I think based on what's being said, and maybe I'm being a little bit more cautious here, I don't know if there's going to be a GPT-5 that comes out with the same exponential increase from GPT-3 to GPT-4. I think there will be an improvement, but I think the focus now is how can we improve model architecture and how can we improve model techniques, and possibly on the inferencing side to achieve better results as opposed to just pumping in more data.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into our next topic around Perplexity's recent $9 billion raise. More so in the recent competitive landscape, we've seen a lot of these different companies come out with similar features to each other. So originally, Perplexity was known for its effectively search GPT product in a way where it would scour the internet to try to give you the best answer. And we've seen recently OpenAI and ChatGPT integrate web search, and we've seen Google results now and Gemini integrating web search. So we're seeing a lot of convergence in terms of all these large foundational model players all releasing their own features that sit on top of their models. So, Gemini today has just launched their Flash Thinking, which is effectively similar to OpenAI's O1 reasoning model. ChatGPT's done Canvas, Gemini's done Mariner, which is like Anthropic's computer use. Everyone has their own coding pilots. Google also released the video model, which competes with OpenAI's Sora. So we can all see there is some type of convergence here. And so there's an interesting question where a company like Perplexity, who doesn't own a model and has the ability to actually interchange between different underlying models, like how can they actually compete here? So I'll open up to Albert to see if he has any thoughts.
Yeah. I think First of all, I don't know that a unique model is necessary to compete. And especially if the AI models are beginning to plateau in effectiveness, I think that's actually a really good thing for AI startups. Because now, let's assume there's a world where AI training does not plateau, right? Eventually, you're gonna basically have one or two players that just have the most dominant model out there. It's like OpenAI having the dominant model for a bit of time with GPT-4 before now we have a plethora of models out there. We got Gemini, we got Claude, we got OpenAI's models as well. So we have a bunch of models out there, and more commoditized models, and especially if the models are at the same playing field, that makes it easier for AI startups um, to get the model they need instead of having to beg the dominant player. Now it's not a monopolized market. They're able to work with what they have. And so in this world where the models and foundational models are more democratized, where everyone has access to foundational models, now it's based on the value of the business that you create on top of the AI. The AI is just enabling technology. It's like saying, how does a startup compete without running its own set of servers? That was solved in 2012 when Amazon launched AWS, and now you got Azure, you got GCP. Now we take cloud computing for granted. We can now take any, high schooler that has a really, really good business idea and create a startup that can reach globally millions of people without needing to actually build out their servers themselves. So I think AI foundational models are the same way. And so coming to Perplexity, I absolutely think Perplexity is going to be able to compete and succeed without having its own foundational model. It comes down to what are they doing with their technology? What are they doing to advance search and other use cases to make sure that they stay relevant, stay on top, especially with Google chasing after it with building its own AI search or OpenAI building their own GPT search. So I think it comes down to how effectively can they build out the value of their product.
Yeah, and we can see Perplexity already move into different realms of Google space, obviously with search, but perhaps a lesser known use case is the shopping feature that Perplexity has. So effectively, it can do a search, compare prices, compare features, and give you the best product as well, which is really cool. So I think Perplexity is moving into a realm where it's going to target different verticals, um, more so than general use cases, which I think is where the large language models providers are generally doing. Like the canvas, the voice, the video, these are more like horizontal or multi-use case type capabilities, whereas Perplexity, I think over time will compete in specific verticals, and they're also going after enterprise search. So Glean, which is a startup, AI startup that does enterprise search, where you can search your internal knowledge base and return the relevant results. Um, Perplexity is moving into this space as well. So it really is an interesting race. I do think over time distribution matters a lot, and that is a huge advantage of the existing incumbents right now. Microsoft through its Windows and Office install base, Google through search, Apple, despite it not having its own foundational model, has, billions of devices. Um, so there still is a interesting dynamic here whether distribution or speed and product will like end up winning. And we've seen different iterations of this play out, like Slack and Microsoft Teams, and so on and so forth. So will be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um, with that said, we want to talk about some of our favorite AI tools that we've come across in 2024. And so, this tool is called Stanford Storm. Unfortunately, it's from Stanford, whereas we're from Berkeley. But having said that, it is a very useful tool for anyone that's writing research reports, and how it differentiates from asking even a web-based search like OpenAI to write your report and reference results. You can see it using a chain of thought approach and sourcing specific like links and websites in order to form it. So here's just a pre-canned query that I put in previously. And so as you can see here, there's a very detailed report with references throughout. So if you try to type this same report into prompt into ChatGPT, you would not get this level of detail. And beyond that, you can actually see the brainstorming process. So with the first prompt it has, you can see it break down a chain of different questions that are all interrelated. And then so it has a basic fact writer where it has specific questions. It also has a social media strategist where it breaks down different questions, and then an SEM specialist. And I think the unique aspect about this is you can click in and actually see where all the reference links take you as well. And so just this level of detail is pretty unique, and I haven't seen in any other LLM before. So for any university students who need to write reference-based reports and want to save time doing search, this could be a fast way to go ahead and do it.
I don't think they're just trying to save time with search if you put this in their hands.
Any thoughts on this product, Albert?
I like it. I mean, first of all, I think this is really cool. This is my first time hearing about it as well. But I mean, I think this is the good side of AI. I think this is, when people think about all the possible AI applications and what AI can be used for and how it can be used for good. I think this is this is, absolutely exemplifying that, right? It's the idea that if you want to know something, um, you can have a well-researched, well-cited, draft of information in your pocket whenever you need it. And I think that was kind of the promise of the internet as well, is you basically have access to all the information you need in your pocket. So like I think that like that's really really neat in and of itself. I guess the question is how are people going to use it? I can absolutely see at least some college students using it a bit less for learning, I would say. So otherwise, I think it's really neat in terms of how they incorporate that chain of thought. And going back to what we said earlier in terms of how people apply the technology, like the idea here, I think, of course, is not necessarily a defensible one that you could go to market with, but it's really cool to see how this applies, especially to the niche use case of building research. So I think it's very well done.
Yeah, I think the defensibility point is really interesting when it comes to startups in general, right? I mean, everyone's dealing with the same type of foundational models. Everyone generally has access to the same amount of data, unless you have some access to, your own unique data set. I think where the difference comes from, especially for these vertical AI use cases, is largely dependent on the domain experience that you have. And it's almost like a SaaS tool where it's the user experience, it's the unique data that you might have access to that no one has access to that really differentiates you. So I think for startups, you got to be quite particular about what you choose to build.
It's interesting that you bring that up, actually, and I will share one of my favorite tools as well. And it's actually, have you heard of Sudowrite? Sudowrite. It's basically if you open the browser for, I'm giving free advertising right now. Uh, it's basically for writing. So no P. It's SU. Yeah, there you go. First link right there. It's an AI writing tool, and basically the idea is, let's say you're writing a novel, there's going to be a user, like there's going to be like a box where you can write, okay, this is where I put my characters, and you can say, okay, this is character's name, and this is what you know about them, and then here's the setting, and here's the type of writing style, etc. And the idea is you can write chapter by chapter. Of if you're trying to write a novel, it will just help you do that, right? It's more about the interface. Nothing it does is unique. Yeah, and you can see a bit of the interface right there. It's like it's a great UI interface for you to kind of map out what kind of story do I want, what kind of characters do I want, and it will just help you co-write a novel for you, and you can look at it, you can rewrite, right? It's application directly to a use case, which is writing. And so, like to your point, that is partially, how it presents to the user. And I played with this. I really liked this for a bit, but ultimately, I actually chose not to use this anymore. And the reason I chose not to, and I went back to ChatGPT, is because the quality of the model actually did make that difference for me. I was seeing better results from what I wanted by using like O1 to craft a prompt and then generate a chapter as opposed to what I was seeing here. So I would agree that the presentation helps, but I think it helps to a extent. I think having that access to that foundational model and the actual results, those will still probably matter.
Yeah. But I think over time, generally speaking, these LLMs will release these best models as an API that a pseudo right can access as well. Like
Yeah,
I know a lot of VCs hate to say I don't want to invest in the AI wrapper, but the reality is most startups are AI wrapper. They do some nice UI interface. They play around with the prompt engineering. They might have some a little bit of unique data that they sprinkle on this idea. But largely speaking, most startups are just still heavily reliant on a foundational model. No one's, at least in the market that I've seen or had, really training their own or even fine-tuning their own models. I think it's a very rare instance a startup does that just because the foundational models today are just so good.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's I guess as a product manager, I can say this. It's not necessarily about the technology, it's about the product and the value and the problem you're solving. That's key.
Yeah. With that said, one of my other favorite tools is Vercel V0. So what V0 by Vercel is it allows you to write a prompt and generate you a user interface in React. So just the example here is I just said, build me a front end, or I didn't even say front end. I said front for an AI-oriented podcast show website. And you can see on the right-hand side here that effectively it's built out the UI here. So it's just, and this was all designed out within like 30 seconds of me building this. And it's written out all the code, and I can ask it to change anything about this if I were to write another prompt. But I think for engineers, it's super useful because it helps you generate the front end code. But even for product managers or even UI designers, rather than even sketch out what a user experience or user interface might look like, you can just ask V0 Vercel to generate you that UI, and you have a working prototype that you can go ahead, test with users, get the feedback, and iterate over time. And so this is one of my favorite tools that I've been using just to, trial out different concepts and test them out in a very quick manner.
Push a bit on that. In terms of working prototype, is there any functionality?
Yeah, so there's code that sits behind it, and I'm sure if
That's
you,
not functionality. That's just front end. Like it's basically how it looks. But if you want to actually walk through different user flows,
yeah,
it
so
doesn't do that.
there are also other tools in the market, Cursor, Lovable, Replit that try to build it more so end to end. What I'm talking about here with Vercel V0, it's just more for building the front end, so it can generate that super quickly, just so you get a flavor of what it could look like.
Yeah. The reason I'm pushing a bit on that is I think like absolutely for UX designers, for product managers who, just want to throw a mock-up together, it's awesome. I would dispute the idea that engineers find this incredibly useful or like, and I think that there's been a narrative that this, like AI is just going to even replace engineers as well. And I think the reason for that is generating the front end and creating a front end is not necessarily, well, I guess unless you're a back end developer, but creating the front end is not the hardest part of building an application. You're basically scratching the top 5%, the top 10% of it. The actual like 80%, 90% is how do you productionize this? How do you build out the back end services? How do you build out the functionality for it? Which is really where you're spending a lot of your time. The front end itself, it's what people see, it's what people index. I think there's a perception where if you can generate a nice looking front end website, now you've solved it, but you haven't really. It's not really something that any developer would use to actually build an app. Maybe if they're trying to, tweak it a little bit or, throw together, a prototype very quickly, and it works. But then even then, maintaining that and updating that, I would dispute that. And I think a number of my friends that are developers as well, like they don't use tools like these because it's for show. It looks cool, but it doesn't actually benefit their job that much.
So what I'd say to that is you do have some AI tools in the market like Devin, which obviously you know extremely well, Lovable, Replit, which are actually trying to build these apps end to end. But you have to understand these companies have been around less than 6 to 12 months. We are still in its very early innings. And yes, they're not perfect. Yes, this will take some time, but you know, we are still in its very early innings, and I wouldn't write them off just yet. Having said that, like Cursor is one of the tools that I've seen a lot of developers use. So it's more as a assistant. So they still write the code, but then Cursor helps them complete the code or it helps them figure out the bugs of the code. So like when I've asked developers, what's their favorite one of these AI coding tools right now, they say Cursor just because it makes them 4 times as productive as they previously do. It just saves them with the mundane tasks because they know exactly what they need to write. But think of the Cursor as just the AI code editor assistant that can help them write code a lot quicker. So I think
Yep.
that's where a
Yeah.
lot of the coding benefits coming from at the moment.
So that I will agree with. And I know we'll go to my next favorite in a second, which is going to continue this train of thought. But I think it's when you think about development, when you think about building out an application, part of it is like architecting the solution and understanding what needs to be done. The building out the boilerplate, building out the if I need a function to, make an API call, like, yeah, I know how to write that. It's just then I have to take the time to write that. And so that's where solutions like Cursor and GitHub Copilot, which incidentally is my favorite tool, but that's where these kind of solutions come in because now I can just say, I want to build an API call for this API. I can like paste a link, paste some API documentation, and it will generate the function that I need to call right then and there. So it does a lot of the boilerplate, allowing you to spend a lot more time thinking about what needs to be built, how you're going to architect it. And I think those are the parts that AI struggle with right now. I think going forward and the way that AI is developing, maybe those will be handled too. I don't think it's been done at this point in time, but I think in a year, a couple of years, especially with more reasoning-based models like O1, I think it's absolutely going to be very interesting. But yeah, Copilot right now. This is my other favorite tool of 2024. When I guess I don't code as much nowadays because now I'm a product manager. But it's really fun for if I'm trying to build out a small project or I have something in mind. I use it to write out a bunch of that boilerplate. I still know what I need to do, but it helps me, to your point, make me 4 times more productive because now I can just say I can write out the pseudocode and it'll turn it into it'll help me write out the actual functions. So yeah, very, very good application of how this applies for this vertical as well.
Yeah, I think we can talk a little bit about the competitive landscape here. So I think today GitHub Copilot came out and said, we're going to offer this free now. And so Gemini, I think a few days ago, released their coding tool. And so it's interesting that the fact that, GitHub, obviously it's bought by Microsoft, which has significant amount of resources, what this actually means for a lot of these startups, right? Because if there is a use case valuable enough, such as coding, similar to what Meta's done in open sourcing its own Llama foundational LLM, effectively these big companies can, offer this free and, burn, the salt of the earth for some of these use cases, right? So it's really interesting to see, GitHub release this for free. I'd be curious to see if people begin to migrate over and cancel their Cursor memberships or anything of that nature. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Albert.
I think there will probably be a lot. I think AI coding is probably going to be democratized in the future, especially with GitHub Copilot going free, so many different solutions. I do wonder what this means for the future of development as a whole, because um, there's the saying that like millennials are raised as like or Gen Z is raised as like the iPhone generation, right? Like they grow up using phones, and so like when you think of technology adoption by generation, like Gen X and Boomers are, they don't adopt like they didn't grow up with the internet and they didn't grow up with tech phones and technology like that, so it's not part of their main workflow. And so millennials are seen as a very high tech generation because we went through the growing pains. We had to fix dial-up issues. We had to, fix Windows issues or, shit like that back when things were still immature. So we got really good at working with technology. Now that we have, folks working with, growing up with really easy to use tools, I think there's been a lot of articles saying they're not as good at solving technology problems anymore. Like if the printer's broken, it's not, intuitive on how to solve that. And so coming to coding, I think it's going to be the same thing. If we have an entire generation of coders that grow up with solutions like this, that means they won't have gone through the trials and tribulations of how do I solve this specific problem? How do I do this, build this thing? How do I do this thing, right? They haven't gone through that problem. They don't have that experience. And so what that means is if they don't have that experience, they don't have that problem, they're not posting about that problem on the internet on Stack Overflow, which is where a lot of these coding solutions are trained on, which means that at some point we may encounter new problems that these AI solutions are not able to solve because they haven't been trained or haven't seen those types of things before. It's like basically we're introducing antibiotic resistant bugs into coding. I'm curious if something like that happens, but it's certainly something that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, it also goes down to, as you say, we're running out of data for the world to train in. And as more and more data becomes AI generated, you're feeding, and as more of the data gets trained on newly generated data, I think we run into that same issue. But
Yeah.
I don't think any of this is going to stop the progress that's going to happen. People will still keep moving forward. I'm sure there'll be some type of solution that people come up with.
We'll
So
see.
yeah.
We'll see what it means for our society, though. That's I don't know if that's
Well,
progress or that's
this
like
is
regressive.
this going back to the other point. Um, I don't know if this is the right analogy to draw, right? But people used to learn C++ plus plus when they were learning how to code, right? Whereas these days, no one generally starts from that level of language to code. People learn Python or JavaScript. So does it mean that they had any more difficulties building apps today? I'm not sure that's true, but yeah, just
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. I would say if you want a job building apps, those are commoditized now because everyone, to your point, now they know JavaScript, they know Python, they know HTML. Like you can get front end engineers dime a dozen. But if you want to go to people that can actually build architecture and, like you still need to have that foundation, not even in C++, plus plus, but going down to, C or assembly or all of that, right? Like these types of skills become more and more valuable. And I think part of it is with a lot of the low level computing now being um, owned by hyperscalers, there's less and less folks that need to worry about this. But the folks at those hyperscalers, they now are very, very valuable because there's not that many folks that have that kind of skill set, or at least there's fewer and fewer like new folks with that kind of skill set. So, um, we're overall, I think we are removing the need for it in a way, but I think we are like the need still exists. So we'll see.
with that said, I think that's a good time to wrap up. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for listening to our second episode of AI Cubed. Feel free to subscribe or add any comments or questions, and we'll answer them. Thanks so much for listening. See ya.
Bye.
Okay, cool. All right. I think we're done.